And writing a paper about Alzheimer's 20 years ago, Alzheimer's just definitely was not as much of a thing back then that it is now. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly it was a thing, but people weren't talking about it as much. And definitely there weren't a lot of people in high school that were talking about it. And I don't even know what hooked me back then. I can't remember what it was about it, except I always growing up wanted to do something that really impacted the world in a big way. And helping improve a brain for someone that had major cognitive dysfunction was exciting even back then. And it's what drives me now. It's really what gets me out of bed every single day to try to find as many solutions as we can. And I had no idea back then how interconnected all sorts of brain related disorders are, whether we're talking about mental health or cognitive health. And it's been so exciting to see the research start to converge over about the last 10 years. And it's way more exciting than I could have predicted.
Down to things like brain fog. We joke around about things like
Mhm.
brain fog in your 20s and 30s. Like that's pretty serious. You should really start to pay attention to some of those things when they come on. And we're seeing people diagnosed with things like Alzheimer's younger and younger and younger as years go on. It's really quite interesting. Where are we as far as like the state of the state when it comes to research on dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that? All of this seems to have been hugely derailed by some apparently fraudulent studies that have been done and sent us down the wrong path for decades. It seems like we're making any progress when it comes to things like Alzheimer's and dementia, as far as like conventional approaches.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of the research that has been done has focused on what's called the amyloid hypothesis. Most people know that there are sticky plaques in the Alzheimer's brain, that one of the biomarkers of the disease is that you have amyloid beta protein that clumps up and forms these plaques. And for a long time, the belief has been that those plaques are both the symptom and the cause of the disease, and that if you could get rid of amyloid beta protein, or at least excess amyloid, if you could get rid of those plaques, that it would be disease modifying and that people would do better. And reality is there are lots of drugs, hundreds of trials that have been done in the last few decades. And some of those drugs actually really do get rid of amyloid beta protein. The problem is nobody's actually gotten better from that. And some people in some of the studies actually get worse. And that's caused a lot of researchers to really question the amyloid hypothesis. And there's still quite a debate going on. You'll find some people that still passionately argue for getting rid of amyloid. And you find drugs, even some of the more recent drugs that have been developed, focused on getting rid of amyloid. And you'll find other researchers that have said, you know what if amyloid is just the symptom of a deeper problem? So a great analogy that might help everybody would be to talk about white blood cells. What if you didn't understand that elevated white blood cells was a sign of your immune system fired up against something? And what if you noticed, hey, every time this person gets sick, their white cell count goes up? We need to create a drug to get rid of those excess white blood cells. If we mistake correlation for causation and we go down that pathway and all of a sudden we give people a drug that's going to wipe out those excess white blood cells, then what do? Well, we take what is a normal physiological response, it's part of the immune response, and we shoot it in the foot, basically. We create a condition where it cannot work the way that it should. Well, a lot of people might die from something like that. Now, if amyloid beta protein is a symptom of Alzheimer's disease, if it's one of the consequences, if the body's inability to clear amyloid tells us something deeper about what's going on, then it's that deeper thing that's the real problem. So the question is not how do you get rid of the amyloid, it's why is the body producing excess amyloid and not clearing it well in the first place? And right now, the state of the research has been focused on some people pivoting that different direction and other people clinging to the amyloid hypothesis. The last thing that I'd add to it, to kind of round out the perspective, is that more and more brain health researchers are focusing on the idea of a multimodal approach as opposed to monotherapies. And monotherapies, I think, are the result of kind of getting intoxicated with our own success. Think about how people were living and dying in about 1900. the average age at death in 1900 was the mid to late 40s. And that average was dragged down heavily by things like women dying in childbirth, children dying of horrible infectious diseases. People were dying of acute illness and infection. So if you're working in Nebraska on the farm and you get your arm caught in a hay baler and it's partially ripped off, the fact that microvascular surgery hasn't been invented in 1900, that's not going to serve you very well. The fact that antibiotics weren't really discovered until about 1927 is going to mean that you might lose the arm, they might amputate the arm, and you probably won't die of that. But there's a high likelihood that you'll die of infection that sets in. And if we can create a single drug that deals with the single biggest factor in that picture, which is bacterial infection, then it's likely that you're going to survive and you're going to do better. And we started discovering everything from antibiotics to vaccinations to all sorts of single interventions that were absolute game changers. And that developed this bias toward doing a double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover trial as the gold standard to determine something objectively works. And that has served us really well to a point, except in diseases that people are now living with for decades before they die. Things like Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and all of its attendant problems. All of these things are lifestyle-driven factors, and they're driven by multiple things. It's not just one thing that's causing those issues. And that warrants more of a multimodal approach. And that's where we're finding real success in neurodegenerative diseases these days.
That's amazing. That was so well explained. I love that analogy. I was just thinking, like, good thing whatever he is describing, big pharma would never do that. They would never give us a pill to only treat one thing that's the wrong thing anyway. They wouldn't do that, would they? Come on. It's never happened. Oh man. Okay. So anecdotally over the years, and starting your company as well, like what have you noticed with the population? Again, we said that, there's more people presenting with all kind of mental disorders. We know that anxiety and depression is on the rise. We're giving, days for mental health. People can take off work for mental health days. Like what have you noticed just anecdotally over the course of your career?
Yeah, I'll answer it both anecdotally and pretty objectively. On the objective side, the World Health Organization came out last year and said Parkinson's disease is the fastest growing neurological condition on the planet. It's outpacing Alzheimer's disease, which is also on the rise and slated to grow pretty dramatically in the next couple of decades. But anecdotally, I have seen more people developing Alzheimer's disease at ages younger than 65 than I've ever seen in the last 23 years. Early onset Alzheimer's means you get it prior to age 65. And we've seen people as young as 39 diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
Oh my
That
goodness.
is absolutely scary to guys like you and me that look at it and we think, man, that's like peer group and younger than peer group. I mean, I'm 48 this month, and I know plenty of people that are in my age bracket that have been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. I'm seeing a lot more mental health cases than I ever saw a couple of decades ago. And I think there are clear-cut reasons for that. And there's a lot that's still yet to be determined, but I have some opinions about that. So I think all of these conditions have been on the rise for a variety of reasons.
Can I ask you to speculate on what those reasons might be in your opinion? Like it's got to be something with our current modern lifestyles that's causing this, unless it's something where we're getting better at diagnosing now than we were before. What are some of your ideas? Again, it could be speculation. I don't think it's all that controversial myself, the things we're going to talk about, but what do you think?
Yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging that some of it might be speculation, and we're just having a conversation here that's interesting, and I think it's interesting to anybody to sit down and consider these things. So, for example, since about 2007, celiac disease has had about a 400% increase. That's ridiculous. That is not possible based on adaptations in the human genome. The human genome does not change that fast. That has to be an environmental issue. And in my opinion, I think it's because that was right around the time that glyphosate or Roundup was it started to get used as a desiccant with wheat.
Yep.
And so the US grain supply is in really sad shape. And I have clients that can go to Europe and eat all the bread they want, and they never have gut health problems. And they cannot do that in this country because so many of the grains, the overwhelming majority of the grains, are sprayed with glyphosate as a desiccant. I think that's wreaked havoc on the US health system.